Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Heartland Mamas. I'm Marie Briel.
And I'm Heidi Henry coming to you from two separate studios at the edge of the Great Red Divide, socially distant, even though I've been had my first vaccination shot. Coming to you every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 p.m., bringing you the progressive news and views you can use from the edge of the Great Red Divide. You can find all of our previous podcasts at Heartland Mamas, MAMAS.com, YouTube, all podcast streaming networks, and proudly part of the Demcast USA network. Murray, today's a big day. The first significant piece of legislation Joe Biden has passed, and it's
Absolutely.
for the country.
It is today is
You
today
know,
is kind of an amazing day. Yeah, for sure.
it
It
really
is it
is.
is a
It really is.
gigantic piece of legislation that had a lot of
Yeah.
um, controversy surrounding it and a lot of fear mongering that went into it. And we're going to break down some of those
Thanks to my member of
fears
Congress.
that the GOP clutched their pearls and fainted on their couches for, and go into what it's really all about. And this piece of legislation is so significant, and
It
it is
is.
ridiculously different, as we'll talk about a little bit later, in how it was created and crafted, and the fact that it was able to get done on a timeline that was so limited and be as extensive and thoughtful as it was is amazing. I have to
Yeah.
say, I'm just thoroughly impressed.
Murray, I look at this piece of legislation compared to the first piece of legislation passed in the previous administration, which was the it changed to the tax code. Both bills cost about the same amount of money, but one bill put all the money at the top income earners, the top 10% income earners. This other bill, this new bill, the rescue plan, changes that. And the people that make the least, that were impacted the most by coronavirus, get the most benefit from it, as it should be, because we have to rebuild this country after a global pandemic from the bottom up. The people who worked checking groceries, driving Uber, delivering pizzas, working two and three jobs, cobbling things together to try to make enough money to survive. Those are the people that were just pasted by this. I had a grocery clerk worker who's now in medical school, in chiropractic college. But I couldn't believe what she had to go through just to be able to perform her job a year ago.
Well, and we know that
I
the
told you in
pandemic
pre-show,
brought
I'm
to light
stunned.
all of the glaring inequities that our system has allowed
Right.
to foster and grow. And we talk about that all the time, and how the inequities are so glaring, and this bill
Yeah.
really addresses those from every perspective. We're talking. So, what is in this bill? Why don't I just run through what's in this, if that's okay, Heidi?
Okay.
We have
Mhm.
transportation, we have housing, we have small business, we have shuttered venues, we have agriculture, education, veterans, testing, science and technology, we have mental health. State and local First Nations are acknowledged and thoughtfully given what they would need. Families, labor, the bill affects the elderly. There's a specific section for benefits
Yes.
related to seniors, which is so important. So the bill is so targeted at individuals and
Right.
groups that are in need. It is a beautiful piece of legislation. And now Heidi and I read all legislation, right? We read,
We
well, not
do.
all. Sometimes
Well,
it's
I'd say most of it.
yeah,
We
we
read it.
digest. We
We
read
read it so
most.
you don't have to.
Yeah, and I'm a big nerd, so I love reading legislation, and then Heidi
Yeah.
is too, so we get to pick it
Yep.
apart. And we were really after reading this act, I read it and then I read it again, and I went back and looked at the CARES Act, and I thought I couldn't really be remembering such a stark contrast in
Yeah.
bills. But when I went back and looked, it was pretty apparent that the contrast was ridiculous, just even in the wording. And Heidi and I talk a lot about a clean bill. I remember when we discussed the last CARES Act, we were like, why is this in there? Why is that in there? This doesn't make any sense. And it was a lot of things that affected no one. And
No one.
this affects a
Oh,
majority of people. It is an
well,
amazing piece of legislation.
Murray, it wasn't that the CARES Act affected no one. It affected the top 10%, just like the tax plan from the previous
You're right,
administration
Heidi.
affected the
You're
top.
right.
Yeah,
Because
it went
I
all
know
to the
I
top. Yeah,
totally benefited from writing off my 3 martini lunch while I was home raising my
oh, my,
kids and
that was supposed to
working
help the
and
restaurant
right. Yeah,
industry.
in an area where we couldn't go. Yeah, that totally benefited me.
Right. Well, I always picture the CARES Act. Have you ever seen those water tubes that they put in the lake and somebody's on the water tube and somebody jumps off and flings them into the water? Have you ever seen that? Ladies and
Yes,
gentlemen, if you
yes,
ever see the
yes,
water tube,
yes.
yeah,
Yes,
okay.
I have.
So I always pictured Trump doing a big belly flop into the water tube and flinging all the workers, the gig workers and the restaurant workers and the hotel workers and all the frontline workers. He belly flops onto that tube and flings them all into the ocean to fend for themselves. To me, that was the CARES Act. Yeah, and here's some cash as you're going down.
Yeah. You know, and
But
and
that's
and
my
yeah, and you're
my
right,
view.
Heidi. That's a really good description of it. But this bill, there were some things that really struck Heidi and myself as we're reading it and we're talking with each
Yeah.
other through the show and whatnot. So I think Heidi, if you don't mind, you had some amazing points about how this is
Well,
going to affect real people.
I think the first thing that jumped out at me was the oversight, and we have to go back to the CARES Act and remember that there was one person in charge, one watchdog in charge of making sure the CARES Act went where it went, and that's why it scattered and didn't go to the people that needed it to the most. The most. The previous president fired Glenn Fine, who was the watchdog. He was afraid he'd watch that money too close, apparently. So he fired him. And
Thinned
this
out the
one,
inspector
every single
general's
one of these staff,
offices.
yes, yes. So now this one, every single facet has oversight to make sure that the money goes where it's supposed to go. There's no more grift. There's no grift in this bill. The CARES Act was
Well,
filled with
I'm
grift.
sure people are going to be
And
able to figure out a way to grift somehow because people are
oh
people
yeah,
and they're not,
there's people who
not
live their
everybody's
life.
good. But overall, you are
Yeah.
correct. The amount of grift in this bill that is without having to go out of your way to find it is non existent. There isn't any. And the
It's
oversight,
almost
every
impossible to
single
find.
clause has an inspector general provision that provides for all of the administration costs of ensuring this program happens the right way, as well as
Yeah.
investigation powers. And that is each
Well,
and every department. I think that's a stark difference to start with. You're right.
we had so getting back to the wonderful things in the American Rescue Plan is the fact that it's the largest anti-poverty bill we've had in 40 years, Murray. I I was trying to explain this to my husband as he was driving, we were driving to get my shot the other day, my first vaccine. And I started crying because I just remember the people whose doors I knocked on that were just so destitute and had no hope coming. Nobody was going to come and help them. And I told him, I said, I think about those people all the time and how their lives will change from this bill because I know as down as they were then, they were worse off. Some of them I did go back to see and helped out a little bit um, as I could because my business was impacted too. But I made sure that they got to the food pantry. I made sure that they got to their medical appointments. And I didn't even get elected, but I was still worried about them, right? But this being an anti-poverty bill is going to help people. Let's start with our senior citizens. We lost an exponential amount of people in nursing homes. And what this does is right off the bat, it gives $12 billion to home health. Now, my dad was dying this time last year. Home health was impossible to afford, right? Because he would go through his benefit so quickly each month. And then my sisters and I would have to cobble together some cash to make sure we could keep people on. Mostly my younger sister did that. And props to her because she could afford it. I could not. So we were, having to help with home health care. And the thing with home health, it allows our seniors to stay in their own home where they're not going to, catch or at lower risk of infectious disease, get better care, better meals, better everything, one-on-one care, which is so important to our senior citizens. Plus, the vaccine rollout, there's money in there to make sure that there's a shot for everybody. Everybody can get their first and second vaccine of the Moderna or Pfizer, or their one-shot deal with Johnson and Johnson. And the delivery, the money is there to make sure that the vaccines are made, the stuff to get it in your arm is made, and that the National Guard is paid to help deliver this stuff to people's arms. Now, not everybody's going
There's
to want a
also
shot.
money in there for encouragement campaigns, for seeing how you can get different communities engaged. There's response
Right.
coordinator positions that have been created. There's a
Yeah.
lot, and I know Republicans claim that's big government. Well, y'all didn't do crap when you had your supposed little government, so I think it's
Yeah.
pretty
You didn't do
legitimate to say.
anything.
But one of the things I noticed that's going to be a huge impact here
Hmm.
is the impact it'll have on gig workers, self employed.
Oh my gosh, yes.
The modifications have now allowed for FMLA to come from uh, gig and self employed workers. Granted, it's only
Right.
$200, but that is still
But,
acknowledgement of something that is needed.
right.
The fact that they're taking care with additional overtime hours for those who have worked through the pandemic, and they're not calling it hazard pay; they're calling it premium payment as a
Right.
discerning for governments to go. Like I was sat in on a Will County executive committee meeting today, and in it, one of the board members objected to hazard pay. He's like, why? This is their job for deputy coroners. And, so there was some discussion that went on. But I think the term is really more correct, premium pay for the work that you have done
Yeah.
during that time. If states and local governments want to go back and give one-time bonuses to those workers, they're able to. And I think that's really a big piece of it here. And I want to talk just a little bit about the myth. And that was one of my favorites is as this bill was being talked about, Republicans freaking out because state and local governments, as well as, which the other one didn't include, First Nations,
Yeah. First
a lot
Nation.
of focus on territories,
Yep.
areas that normally are left out was very
County
specifically
government
highlighted. The amount of money
left
that is
out.
going to be sent into the Indigenous People Bureau, the Native American Bureau, is amazing. And it's for much needed for everything that they've needed for so very long. So this bill not only addresses those things, but what it does is it's forward thinking. And Heidi, we've talked about
Right.
forward thinking legislation in the past, and this is so forward thinking in the fact that it is repairing old problems and preparing for potential future problems. And that's so rare in a
Exactly.
piece of legislation. It's usually so slapdash, stop the dam. That
Yeah.
this is just an amazing piece, and the Republicans, those Democratic cities and states, they're, well, guess what? It's equally divided, and it's not just divided among states. They break it down further into urban cities, or that's not the term, but they're high density population target cities have their own funds, much the way the last one
Yes.
did, and then
Hmm.
counties and down. There isn't really any group that I don't think wasn't affected by
Township
this. As far
governments
as putting
will benefit.
funding
County.
into
Yeah.
grants, Pell
Yes.
Grants. Do you remember Pell Grants?
I remember Pell Grants. I'm
A
a
long
college
time
age
ago,
child.
you could get a grant to go to
Yeah.
school.
Right.
And you wouldn't have to pay it back as long as you stayed in school and
Kept your grades up.
yeah, you kept
Yeah.
your grades up. That type of program is now back. Funding for students, going through school. It's just a really remarkable piece of legislation.
Murray, that is proactive legislation that will prevent student loan debt, which is a problem that we wrestle with every day in this country. It doesn't address the current level of debt, but it prevents a huge amount of debt from happening. So, the one thing we don't talk about, and I'm going to go a little bit down a rabbit hole here, is the low birth rate here in the United States. We're at an epic low birth rate. And the reason this is important now, Illinois is being redistricted, and we're going to lose one of our members of Congress. I'm hoping it's mine. And we're going to lose one of our districts. And people keep saying it's because people are moving out. Yes, old people like me move south. Not me. I like snow. I don't mind the cold. So I'll stay here because I'm an Illinois person and Florida's crazy.
Yeah,
But
for
sorry,
sure.
Floridians.
For sure.
um, the thing is that part of the reason Illinois is losing a legislative district is because of our low birth rate. We have to talk about the fact that student loan debt is impacting the birth rate in the United States among educated people, especially amongst all people, but educated people especially. So if you can't have a baby because you can't afford to take time off of work because you have too much student loan debt, here's some help coming to prevent this from being a problem in the future with this increase in Pell Grants. So I know that we always talk about we want to be the progressive news and views that you can use, but this is progressive legislation. Oh my God.
And
So,
Heidi, and it's not just progressive legislation, it's actual logical legislation.
mhm.
It's things that make sense that should have been done, and it's not some sort of
No,
socialism run amok. Hey, when a senator from Mississippi brags to his constituents about how great this bill is going to be
he
for
didn't
his
vote
people,
for it.
even though he wouldn't vote for it,
Yeah.
I just gotta say. And then I think you heard, Sean Hannity or Mark Meadows say no one will ever be elected again in
And
that's a
the
Republican.
Democratic majority is going to continue because after this, nobody will have incentive to vote Republican. Yeah, they will. There are some people that are stuck in that rut because it's how they always have. But I think what people will see is how our tax dollars are used and what manner they're used for. So in the previous administration, it all went to the top, tippy top. And we know from Reaganomics, there is no such thing as trickle down. So here we're building back from the bottom. The people impacted the most, the parents of young children, and we'll talk about that in a minute because that is like the cherry on the cake. We're talking about gig workers. We're talking about single parents. We're talking about people who live below the poverty line. In red states, we're looking at you,
We're talking
seven and a
about
quarter
our
minimum wage.
seniors,
Our
about
seniors.
we're talking about our veterans. I mean,
No, so
our
excited.
farmers, every possible, our mental health. And one of the things I
Yes.
really want to point out is that there is not only the funding for the state and local governments, but there's also specific funding for rural health care. That's additional
Oh
funding
my
that's
God.
coming out. And, the bill addresses the fact that you have such a small amount of infrastructure and balance in rural communities and
Yeah.
healthcare. And that's something, Heidi, we've talked about many, many times. And this bill
Yeah.
addresses that, not just pandemic, but fixing what needs to be fixed and planning as we talked about moving forward.
Well, we tried to fix rural health care and really did made great strides in that under the Obama administration with the ACA because Medicaid expansion helped shore up these not
Providers.
profitable medical centers in the middle of nowhere. And my trip across the Great Red Divide and how stunned I was at the small size of a Kansas hospital and how far apart they are, 100 miles, 200 miles at times. If you're having a heart attack, you're dead. And Kansas did not take Medicaid expansion. Their rural hospitals closed and closed and closed and closed and closed. Like dominoes, they went. Kansas, Texas. In Texas, they literally have an area where your ambulance driver could also be your doctor as he drives you 4 hours to the clinic. It's just how it works because they didn't take Medicaid expansion. So now under the American Rescue Plan, it gives them additional funding to fix that infrastructure so you're not 4 hours from a doctor when you need it.
And when you mentioned something, one thing that I think is really important to note here is that you mentioned funding, not having to go so far
Mm-hmm.
for the clinic, rural health. Oh, sugar, sugar, sugar. It's in the bill. Sorry, my brain just sort
It's
of
okay.
flipped on
But
what I wanted to.
Marie, there's also money in this bill to prevent future pandemics and to chart and watch these mutations that come apart so that when you're doing testing, they can test and find out which mutation you have from the coronavirus. And then we have to, under the previous president, our World Health Network was and disease prevention network was disintegrated, thanks Bill Barr. And now this rebuilds it back better so that we can communicate. We rejoined the World Health Organization, and
We
I
donate.
think
We
I
dedicated
think we've learned
funds
a really
for
horrible
emerging
lesson.
pandemics, for rapid response, for
Yes.
teams to be able to go to other nations and help and try to resolve it. One thing I want to talk about that when I forgot my train of thought, is when you're talking about healthcare, they're reimbursing providers who lost services during the pandemic and
Yeah.
weren't able to do those elective services that keep that sort of back, keep them going. But here's something
Hmm.
for the worker. Okay, so if you've ever been unemployed and if you've ever had healthcare through your insurance and you've been unemployed, you know that you have the option of getting Cobra. And
Yes.
before there
Cobra.
was the ACA,
Yeah.
that was the only thing that existed, and most people have to take Cobra. Now, it is
Right.
insanely expensive.
Yes.
Um, for our family, it was $1,500 a month just for Cobra, and then all your copays and everything else on top of it.
Right.
Well, what this plan is doing, it will subsidize your payments for Cobra. So, as a worker, if you get laid off due to this pandemic, you don't have to worry about making that $1,500 a month Cobra payment or that
Right.
$700 a month Cobra payment. The government's going to help you out with that, which only makes sense. And if we had universal health care, we wouldn't even need that. But
Well, and so we have to bring it around, Marie, to whenever we talk about legislation like this, which is so rare, um, and a global pandemic is so rare, thank God. But when we talk about this, people, the first question people will email me is how much money am I getting and when am I getting it? Well, pretty much everybody's going to get a check for $1,400 if you're watching this podcast. I don't think we have a lot of high dollar. Well, I don't know. Maybe we
I
do, but
know. And if you are a high dollar listener, please donate. Donate, like, subscribe, and share. Please send us money because we do this and we could use it too. I didn't see anything in the bill for fledgling podcasters, so I'm a little disappointed in
no.
that, Joe. Kind of messed up on that one. But carry on, Heidi. I apologize.
Well, so just about everybody, $75,000 or is it 75,000 and less is going to get a check for $1,400, including some that didn't get them in the last couple times. And don't forget when you file your taxes this year to hit the button that you think if you didn't get a check under the last year cycles, the two of them, check the box so that they look and see if you can get it anyway. Under when you file your taxes, that was the stopgap. My daughter did, and she qualified, so that's great. So, but I want you to know that your $1,400 check per person is on its way to you. Well, will be next week. The first check should start rolling out next week.
And they
And
will not have Joe
again, direct
Biden's name
deposit
on it. I
because
personally
he's
wouldn't
not a
mind if it had the
narcissist.
Democrats, name on it, but we can't do that. We're not
Well,
petty. Like Rachel Maddow said last night,
no,
Democrats aren't petty, although I am with her that I think we might want to be a little bit petty, but
I could be. I have been. Um, but I think more importantly than this one-time $1,400 payment, Marie, is what they're calling the child tax credits, which for the next 12 months, for every child you have under the age of 18 or under, you're going to get a check in the mail from, or, direct deposit from the government beginning about July. And you'll get $300 for kids under 6 for each kid. You're going to get $250 for each kid 18 and under. And it's going to come to you no matter what your income, because we know that young parents are never so poor in their life than when they're trying to put shoes on 5 kids or 2 kids or whatever it is.
And
You've
then,
got
not to
doctor
mention
bills,
the
you've got,
supplemental programs, Heidi. Look at the
yeah,
expansion that has happened for independent employees, self employed workers, on insurance employment, benefits, taking care of the COBRA, and the investment that they put into early childhood education, daycare, childcare providers, supplementing parents. There's also supplementations for parents when it comes to finding childcare. I mean, this bill really addresses
yes.
so many societal.
It's going to get people back to work, Marie.
It's going to make people
You
whole,
know,
Heidi. It's not about going back to
it's going to
work.
make people
We
whole.
put too much emphasis
Yeah.
on work and success and in general. It is, we need to, this
Yeah.
pandemic should have taught us anything. It's that we should be focusing on making people whole, giving people the
Yeah.
opportunity to be whole, because if you're not worried
To
about
rise up.
where your job, where your next meal is coming from, if you're not worried about being thrown out of your home, if you're not worried and working 2 jobs so your kid can have braces, then what
Yeah.
happens is you have time now to learn, to read, to go to school, to open a business, to add to the community, to volunteer, because you're not trying to keep it all together. And this bill is more about making the nation whole. And it's a phenomenal piece of legislation.
I agree, Marie. In the last year, 23 million women left the workforce. That's the fewest amount of women in the workforce since 1988. Women took it on the chin hard for COVID. We were the ones that, and I don't have little kids, so I say we, but it was moms like Murray whose soccer club went away. She couldn't do that when she was, so her business, she ended up being the homeschool teacher, not
Which
homeschool, but remote school
I've
teacher.
always had respect for teachers, but wow, listening to your classes, because my kids never want to use their earbuds, so I hear 3 different classes all the time.
I,
Good thing I'm good at ignoring most sounds I hear. You guys are saints, man. Rock it out. Teachers are just kind of awesome. I want to say big props
but
because, and I'm not a teacher, just FYI.
But for women, they've lost great strides in their career choices as well, because they had to change and we had to stay at home, be stay-at-home moms again, and not every mom wants to be that. A lot of moms were really glad for that, but financially, since Reaganomics changed, you can't survive as a small family, as a young family anymore without 2 incomes. You just can't. Most of us can't anyway. I had to work, my husband had to work, my mom had to work, my dad worked. Everybody works because Reaganomics designed it so nobody can stay at home. Everybody has to be employed. And if you're not, and you're employed to reach poverty level at some point. So these economic structures that have been put in place, and this stipend is good for 12 months. I had somebody online yesterday that I'm friends with that said, "Oh, it's going to cause welfare queens." God, can't how many times do we have to say it? There's no such thing as a welfare queen. That was
Yes, there
made
are.
up
Stop it
as
right
racial
now.
prejudice.
Corporations are welfare queens.
Okay, so but there's no okay,
Individual
pardon me,
human
but black
welfare
woman in
queens.
town with 30 people, with
Right.
30 children that's collecting on all of them and driving a Mercedes, that's a freaking lie. It always has been a lie. I had to work under the Clinton administration because of that stupid welfare queen lie. They passed something called welfare to work. I had to work and counsel those women that were not in a position to go back to work, that didn't have the skill set, that didn't have childcare, that didn't nothing. But if they wanted to keep their welfare, they had to go work. So it didn't matter that they didn't have childcare. It didn't matter that they had a sick child, nothing, or a skill set, or were in school. They had to go out and work. That cost women dearly, and I've hated Bill Clinton ever since for passing that. So this is not that. this is an opportunity for women to be successful again as mothers, as workers, as in their careers, without feeling like you're failing and dropping the ball every which way. Because as moms, we always
It's a
feel bad.
chance to give a little bit more of a level playing field all around. It's a chance to refocus on science. There's so much investment in surveillance technology, which we have absolutely no surveillance system for. We do at some states, there is now, but genomic sequencing. We don't know where, most states don't know where those viruses are or they're emerging unless you have a certain types of tests. So that this bill really addresses so many areas of desperate need, and it's so well thought out, and it is
Yeah.
so contrary to the last act to help. It made me feel really good reading it. Like, I'm like, all right, I
Yeah.
wanted to find fat. I wanted to be like, oh, there's
You
this.
wanted to find the bridge to nowhere, and it wasn't there.
I
It was
did.
nowhere to be
I
found.
wanted to find the bridge to nowhere, man. I really
I
did.
was looking for it too, and couldn't find it. So, the bottom line is that um, when Joe Biden promised us when we elected him to build back better, I'm so glad that he started. Everybody knows that a tower needs to be built by strong pylons underneath. The bottom is your strength. And when the people that are at the low end of the income scale are strong, we all rise from that platform. And I, you know, I
Isn't there an
wept when I
expression?
read that.
You're only as the a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
That's right.
And
That's right.
so people, when everyone, rising boat lifts, or the rising tide lifts all boats, it's the same sort of
That's right.
concept that we can
That's
all be
exactly it.
successful, right? So,
Yeah.
guys, thank you for listening. We are really excited to announce that Heidi and I and the Heartland Mamas podcast is going to the radio. We'll be doing a weekly show to start. We will be posting all that information, and our first show is going to be a more detailed explanation of the CARES Act and what's in it. So be sure to watch our website
So,
and our social media for
yeah.
that. Again, please, if you
Download the
like
app.
us, subscribe and
Download the app for
share.
WRWO. So,
Like,
because that's where we'll be.
subscribe and share, donate. We have a button on our website. We would like that too. If you're one of those really wealthy listeners, that would be great. But tune in every Tuesday and Thursday live on Facebook at 3 p.m. Any place you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube and on our website as Heartland Mamas.
mamas.com. We'll see you later, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.